I'll explain what the subcontracting module does and doesn't do. So subcontracting is based on having, first of all, subcontract vendors, which is simply saying for certain vendors, you designate those as subcontractors. So there's a field on the vendor card. And so let's say First Up Consultants here, you can treat those as a subcontract. And actually, you can see I already put a check mark on First Up Consultants as subcontractor. That means that if I go to my list of subcontract vendors, I now have First Up Consultants in that list, but it's not every single vendor. It's not my utilities vendors. It's not all those extra vendors. It's only those that I can do subcontracting for. It doesn't make sense to have the electricity company or gas or water or sewage or whatever you're paying for as a subcontractor. Then we get a subcontractor vendor card, which is just additional data for those vendors who are subcontractors, where we can keep track of a little bit more, like the status of them as a subcontractor. This is where we can put in insurance details. This is critical in the US, where you cannot hire somebody unless they have all the liability insurances, and you need to know if they are not insured up to $1 million, you cannot use them for a certain job. With those subcontract vendors, you can then create a subcontract. And this is really the idea, that you set up a subcontract, and again, you can put on additional details about special reason codes and terms and subcontract types, etc. But what is really interesting is that you create a set of lines of what have you subcontracted for. These are related to a task on the project. You describe what the work is to be done and what are we subcontracting for, either resources, items, or expenses. Most of the time it is resources. We are not putting in a resource number, but we're putting in usually a product posting group. And this is a bit special in that regard. You could also put in a resource group for and say we need plumbers. And then that should fill in some of those other fields. And then we put in how many are we buying, 100 hours at an agreed rate. There could be retention of those. It could be capped to say it is a maximum of 100. And there could even be pricing if this is to be invoiced to the end customer. So this is basically a price list you're creating specifically for this piece of work. And what you get out of it is that you can then raise purchase requests based on this. So now we have this, and then we say, this is now active. And oh yeah, that was the one I forgot. So I need to put in my product posting group. I can put this as active, and then they start working on it. And then there are two ways of working with this. Now they started working, and then we can make subcontract payment requests. So this is based on a principle where we suggest them what they should invoice us for. So it's really made for those cases where you are subcontracting for somebody, they're performing work, and you're saying, okay, this is the work you performed. You should send us an invoice for this amount of work. So it's a reverse billing subcontract. What you do here, is you say, okay, so for, again, this project, you can load the subcontract items. So this subcontract, load the subcontract items, which are not necessarily items. It's just the word item is lines, really. And so we can see it pulled in the line where we say this was 100 items at this rate. And then we can put in how many are we requesting for. Yes, we agreed that they did 15 hours of work in this period. And so this is what they should invoice us for. We can either put this in manually or we can load transactions. Now, they haven't done any timesheets, but if we got timesheet data from them, then we could pull this in and say, you have submitted timesheets for 15 hours. We are now pulling these in, and this is the basis for it. Or we do it manually because we know that you say you worked 15 hours. Now this is it. And then we submit that as a request. And this can then be the basis for invoicing. This is where we can create an invoice for it. So with these requests, we can get to subcontract purchase invoice, where we say, now we have one, but of course there could be multiple. And then we can create an invoice for this. This, of course, will be a purchase invoice. And this is what we will send to the subcontractor. I'm missing some setup in this, but otherwise it'll create a purchase invoice. We would send it out and say, please send us an invoice that matches this, and then we will pay for it. I have one customer who does business like this, where they have a lot of subcontractors who are sole traders, basically. We know you're really bad at billing, so we're sending you the invoice that you should send to us. What we see mostly done is you set them up with an Excel sheet that you send, and then you import that into a journal. And how is that a lot better than them sending you an invoice? But of course, if they never get around to that, then yeah. So my take on it is that it's actually a nice feature, but I don't see it used that much in real life. And there are some features where you can also handle, I mean, you can separate out what are change orders, etc. The subcontract change order list and some features regarding that when they say, well, we said 100 hours, but then you said there was some additional work and you would tracking those. And at least in construction, there's always the concept of change order variations, we would probably call them. And that, of course, also goes for your subcontractor. So you need to track them there as well.